Picking out her canned tomatoes, Peggy Chambers made sure that she was checking the labels and buying Canadian. Canada is fighting back as Trump imposes heavy tariffs on Canadian goods. A national boycott of US products is surging, shaking up industries on both sides of the border, with billions at stake and prices set to soar. Could this trade war rewrite North America's economic future? February 1st is when US President Donald Trump has said he could impose a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, which has some shoppers here thinking twice about what they buy at the grocery store and which brands they are supporting. CTV's Kimberly Johnson joins us now. Kimberly, Patricia, many shoppers I spoke to today say that they are thinking more and more about what they are putting in their cart, putting a renewed focus on Canadian-made goods. Buying as many Canadian products as she can is more important than ever for her because of the threats made by US President Donald Trump that he'll impose a 25% tariff on Canadian-made goods. Starting February 1st, Chambers wants to make her voice heard. A long shopping list is being shared widely online, naming popular grocery items, some made in the US, against other Canadian-made options, like soft drinks, condiments, and snack foods, like potato chips, telling consumers to look for homegrown brands. It's not known who started the list, but food analysts say a list like this can be a helpful place to start, though some American companies use Canadian farmers and distributors, so it can be complicated. The trade dispute began when Trump announced a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods and a 10% tariff on Canadian energy. The White House executive order cited an extraordinary threat posed by illegal aliens and drugs as the rationale behind these tariffs. However, Canada has argued that the flow of these issues from the north into America is minimal compared to the southern border. In retaliation, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a series of countermeasures during a press conference. Trudeau stated, "We don't want to be here. We didn't ask for this, but we will not back down in standing up for Canadians." Canada plans to impose 25% tariffs on 155 billion Canadian dollars and $7 billion US worth of American goods. This will be implemented in 2 phases. An initial 30 billion in counter tariffs, followed by an additional 125 billion in planned tariffs. Tonight, I am announcing Canada will be responding to the US trade action. The Canadian consumer response to these trade tensions has been swift and significant. A growing Buy Canadian movement has emerged, with social media groups promoting Canadian products, gaining hundreds of thousands of new followers. Viral shopping lists of Canadian alternatives to popular American brands are circulating online, encouraging consumers to make conscious choices about their purchases. Individual consumers are taking action by boycotting US products. While grocery shopping, she carefully checks labels, prioritizing Canadian-made products. Chambers said, "I approached it cautiously because I am very aware of what's happening politically. Looking at things, whether it's made in Canada, as long as it's not made in the States, you think you're safe." Provincial governments are also joining the boycott efforts. Several provinces have announced the removal of United States-made alcohol from liquor store shelves. Tim Houston, the Premier of Nova Scotia, said officials would direct the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation to remove all alcohol from the United States from their shelves. This action directly impacts the US alcohol industry, which has historically seen Canada as a significant export market. The impact of these trade tensions and consumer responses is being felt across various industries. In the food and beverage sector, produce is a major concern, especially during winter months when Canada heavily relies on imports from the southern United States. Matt Poirier, Vice President of Federal Government Relations at the Retail Council of Canada, stated, "I think the big one right now is produce. This time of year, in the middle of winter, we're importing most of our produce from the southern United States. The Canadian government's list of counter tariffs specifically mentions items such as tomatoes, cucumbers, citrus fruits, melons, berries, and stone fruits. These perishable items can't be stockpiled in advance. Consumers could expect to see prices jump on those immediately after any tariffs come into effect. Orange juice, particularly from Florida, is another product facing potential price increases. Canada imported $96 million in fruit juice in 2022, primarily from the US. The Florida Department of Citrus notes that Canada is one of the most important markets for US citrus, specifically Florida citrus. With limited Canadian alternatives, consumers may see a significant rise in orange juice prices. If tariffs are implemented, cereal and grain products are also affected. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reports that baked goods, cereal, and pasta were the top consumer-oriented food exports from the U.S. to Canada from 2019 to 2023, with nearly $2.8 billion in sales. In 2023, Canadian counter tariffs specifically target grain products, including wheat, rye, barley, oats, rice, and pasta. The alcohol industry is bracing for significant changes. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 35% of the country's wine exports, 11.2% of beer exports, and 10.6% of hard liquor exports came to Canada last year. Key brands like Don Julio Tequila and Jack Daniel's whiskey could become more expensive for both US and Canadian consumers if importers increase prices to cover potential tariff costs. Personal care products and clothing are also on the list of items targeted by Canadian counter tariffs. This includes cosmetics, toiletries, and various clothing items. The annual value of imported cosmetics and body care items to Canada is approximately $3.5 billion, with the US being the largest supplier of beauty products. These trade tensions and resulting consumer behaviours have broader economic implications. Canadians may face potential price increases across various product categories. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce estimated that Trump's 25% tariff would cost Canadians about $1,900 per person annually. The independent think tank Public Policy Forum projects that retaliatory tariffs could cause consumer prices to rise by 4.1%. Finding Canadian alternatives for certain products poses a challenge, as Fen Osler Hampson, a professor of international affairs at Carleton University, said, "There's a reason why we buy American or buy Chinese. It's because we're not making enough of it ourselves." This situation could lead to increased demand and prices for Canadian-made products. Unless suppliers can quickly ramp up production, the impact on Canadian businesses and jobs is a significant concern. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has suggested that up to 500,000 jobs could be lost in his province under the proposed tariffs. Alberta could see 50,000 jobs lost, according to financial forecasts. In response to these challenges, the Canadian government has adopted a Team Canada approach, calling for national unity during this crisis. Prime Minister Trudeau stated, "In this moment, we must pull together. We pride ourselves on braving the cold during the long winter months. We don't like to beat our chests, but we're always out there waving the maple leaf, loudly and proudly, to celebrate an Olympic gold medal." The government is also taking steps to mitigate the impact on Canadian workers and businesses, including establishing a remission process to consider requests for exceptional relief from the tariffs. Provincial initiatives are also emerging, with several provinces launching Buy Local campaigns. Wabkanu, the Premier of Manitoba, urged Canadians to buy homemade goods, stating, "Where you spend your money, those are some of the most important decisions that you make." The retail sector is adapting to these changes, with some stores prominently displaying Made in Canada labels to help consumers make informed choices. These trade tensions are straining Canada-US relations, potentially leading to long-term shifts in trade patterns. The situation also raises questions about the future of the USMCA agreement, which was negotiated and signed by both countries, along with Mexico. Trudeau emphasized this point, saying, "They will violate the free trade agreement that the President and I, along with our Mexican partner, negotiated and signed a few years ago." Canadian consumers have expressed mixed opinions on the effectiveness of boycotts. Pierre Oliver, a 67-year-old Ontario business owner, feels that boycotting is a drop in the bucket, but the only thing we can do. Others recognize the complexities involved. Sylvain Charles, a professor at Dalhousie University, points out that many American companies use Canadian farmers and distributors, making a simple boycott more complicated than it might appear. He states, "If you see the brand itself as being your main point to make a decision, you may be deciding that you're boycotting Canadian farmers, Canadian distributors, Canadian processors." The boycott movement has also manifested in unexpected ways. Some Canadian sports fans have been booing performances of the Star-Spangled Banner during professional sporting events, including Toronto Raptors basketball games and NHL's Canucks games. Economists and trade experts offer varying perspectives on the potential outcomes of this trade dispute. Some analyses suggest that Canada's GDP could take a hit of between 1.8% and 5.6% if 25% blanket tariffs are imposed on Canadian goods. Depending on how and whether Canada retaliates, the US GDP would be affected to a lesser extent, with projections ranging from 0.9% to 1.6%. Drew Fagan, a professor at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, highlights the challenge Canada faces in responding to these tariffs. He said, "Knowing the pain of responding is not proportional means we have to be smarter in how we Canada respond, and that's tricky. It's hard to be strategic with an administration like this, whose thinking is often a little bit more off the cuff." The Canadian government is considering various options. In its response, Trudeau mentioned that nothing is off the table when it comes to responding to the US tariffs. This includes potential non-tariff measures, such as actions related to critical minerals, energy procurement, and other partnerships. There are signs of internal disagreement within Canada on how to respond. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith did not sign the joint statement released after a meeting with other provincial leaders, stating that Alberta will not agree to export tariffs on energy or other products or a ban on their exports. This highlights the complex balancing act Canada must perform, considering the diverse economic interests of its provinces. The energy sector is particularly contentious. Some Canadian leaders see energy as a potential leverage point in negotiations with the US Newfoundland and Labrador Premier. Andrew Furey said, "I see energy as Canada's queen in this game of chess. We don't need to expose our queen too early. The opposition does need to know the queen exists, but they don't need to know what we do with the queen." The future of Canada-US trade relations remains uncertain as both countries navigate these tensions. The interconnectedness of their economies becomes increasingly apparent. Canada is the largest export market for 36 US states and is among the top 3 for 46 states, with 43 states exporting over $1 billion US to Canada every year. The US Census data shows that last year, the US exported more than $322 billion in goods to Canada and imported more than $377 billion worth of products from its northern neighbor. The potential for resolution and future cooperation exists, but it will require careful negotiation and compromise from both sides. Trudeau expressed hope for this, saying, "If President Trump wants to usher in a new golden age for the United States, the better path is to partner with Canada, not to punish us. As I've said before, if President Trump wants to usher in a new golden age for the United States, the better path is to partner with Canada." As this situation continues to evolve, Canadian consumers are faced with choices that extend beyond their shopping carts. Their decisions have the potential to impact not only their personal finances, but also the broader economic landscape of their country. George Ohana, Director of Homelessness Prevention at the Old Brewery Mission in Montreal, expressed concern about the potential ripple